It was a cold, moonless night, and I found myself on the longest delivery run of my life. The order was 4 large pizzas and fries from a pizza place where I used to work, and the destination was a remote cabin deep in the woods on the outskirts of town. The drive took me a good 30 minutes, even though I was trying to be quick so the food didn't get cold. I arrived at the address, which was an old cabin right in the middle of a forest clearing. I figured it must have been a holiday home or something. There were no cars parked nearby and the place was totally dark. To be honest, I started to doubt the legitimacy of the order. There was no sign of anyone being there. This had to be a prank order. I called my boss repeatedly to confirm the address, but he didn't answer. I had returned to my car and was honestly about to leave when he called me back. He was irritated and told me to at least knock on the door and check it out. With a sigh, I reluctantly exited my car and approached the cabin again. There was no doorbell, so I knocked on the shabby wooden door. Silence. I began to feel like I was definitely wasting my time and there were other orders waiting back at the pizza place. I knocked one more time and that's when I heard the faint sound of rustling from within the cabin. My heart raced as I knocked again and called out that I was the pizza delivery guy. I could barely see anything, it was so dark, but I suddenly noticed something unsettling in the window. A pair of eyes seemed to be staring out at me, wider than I thought possible. Their gaze was locked onto mine. I couldn't tell if they were male or female. It gave me such a fright that I dropped the pizzas and bolted back to my car. As I fumbled to start the engine, I finally got it to come to life on the 3rd try and I sped away from the cabin. But as I moved off, the car was shaking and bumping horribly and came to a sudden halt. Stepping out to see what was the matter, I realized the tires had been slashed, all 4 of them. They just hung off the rims like deflated balloons. My stomach dropped as it hit me that someone had done this while I was knocking on the cabin door. Instead of running away, I climbed back into the car and locked the doors. The cabin was still so close I could almost see it through the trees. I called 911 and explained the situation to the operator. She assured me that the police were on their way and told me to stay in my car. I remember my heart was pounding and my whole body trembling uncontrollably. After a while, I couldn't stand being in the car any longer. It felt claustrophobic. I felt like a sitting duck. So I decided to leave my car. Just before I got out, I scanned around to make sure no one was there. I checked my rearview mirror and that's when I spotted a person. The same person, I'm sure, from the cabin window. It was a woman with eyes wider than I've ever seen. She was just stood there behind the car, smiling. Terrified now, I flung open the car door and sprinted into the woods, not caring about not being able to really see the ground. I ran until I was gasping for breath, then hid behind a massive fallen log. I covered my mouth to muffle my heavy breathing, waiting for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I heard the distant wail of sirens. Summoning every ounce of strength left in me, I ran back toward the dirt road. Red and blue lights came into view and I couldn't have been more relieved. The police cars were parked by my car and officers were inspecting the scene with flashlights. I stumbled toward them shouting for help. They asked me a load of questions and I told them everything I could. 2 officers went to investigate the cabin and they found it to be empty. The police thought it might have been the work of a twisted person or maybe a couple, given my description of the woman. Unfortunately, whoever they were never found. I quit my job at the pizza place immediately and found work at a restaurant instead. I still think about that night a lot. I'm 29 years old, living alone in a small rural town just a couple of streets away from my parents. My parents, both in their late 60s, had started to worry me in their old age, especially my mother, who had become increasingly anxious over the years. She would often show up uninvited and let herself into my house, thanks to the key I had reluctantly given her. I found it a challenge to assert my boundaries with her because she's my mum, she's sweet and loving, plus my parents helped me with a deposit on my house, so it's hard to tell them they shouldn't have a key. And to make matters more complicated, it turned out my mum had developed mild dementia. One Saturday night around 2 a.m., I was at a nearby club with a group of old friends. It's the only place worth hanging out at in our town. As I said bye to my mates and stumbled back home, I realized my front door was unlocked. My heart sank. My mum had invaded my privacy again. Quietly, I entered and locked the front door behind me, placing my keys on the kitchen counter. There was a note in my mum's handwriting saying that I had forgotten a sweater at their house, and next to the note was a half-eaten cake they didn't want. I assumed my mum had gone upstairs to sleep in the guest bedroom. I heard footsteps upstairs, and assuming my mum was still up, I went upstairs and checked the guest bedroom to see her, but she wasn't there. She was nowhere to be seen upstairs. I started to worry that she might be having an episode of some sort, so I rushed to the phone to call my dad. After 4 rings, he answered, still half asleep, and I explained the situation. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then my dad said, "That's not possible. She's sleeping right next to me." My heart stopped as I turned around to look back upstairs, where I could barely discern the silhouette of a head peering from around the corner at the top, looking down at me. I screamed into the phone and bolted out the front door, sprinting down the street to my parents' house while narrating everything to my dad on the way. Halfway to their house, my dad said he'd call the police and hung up. My mum was already waiting at the door when I arrived. She was worried sick. She explained that she had come by earlier to clean my kitchen and bring over that unwanted cake. She was worried she might have left the door unlocked. 2 police cars pulled up in front of my parents' house shortly after, and they escorted my dad and me back to my place. While 2 officers conducted a thorough search of my house, another stayed outside with us. 15 agonizing minutes later, they came back out reporting that the house was clear. They had checked the crawl space, the attic, and every nook and cranny. There was nothing substantial to report except the unlocked door and my sighting of this mysterious figure upstairs. Well, after that incident, my dad took it upon himself to prevent my mum from coming over to my house alone. It took months for my sleep to return to normal. I'd sometimes wake up in the middle of the night in cold sweats and have to search the house to check that there was no one there. One summer night in 2018, my friends and I found ourselves wandering the streets of our small town in search of something, anything to do. We were laughing and shooting the breeze as we strolled through the neighborhood. It was all good vibes. As we made our way down to a quiet residential street, one of my friends suddenly pointed to a bush and said, "Hey, over here, I think someone's hiding in this bush." He said it with a grin on his face, and we thought he was just still messing around. But kind of curious, we approached the bush to get a better look, and our laughter faded away. As we got nearer, we could make out a faint silhouette hidden among the leaves and branches. As we drew even closer, this strange sound emanated from the bush. It wasn't a recognizable sound at all, unlike anything we had ever heard before. We all gasped, caught off guard, and then kind of chuckled nervously to mask how we were feeling. Although that sound had been really odd, unsettling, it was strangely comical to us at the time. We didn't feel threatened because there were quite a few of us, but our bravado quickly faded when the sound from the bush grew louder and more unsettling. Eventually, panic took hold and we just ran off. Well, we all returned to our respective homes, each of us putting the bizarre encounter sound, whatever you want to call it, down to a prankster, some kids playing tricks on us. When I got back home, I went to bed and quickly fell asleep thanks to the couple of drinks I'd had while I was out. Then, sometime later, I awoke but was unable to move a muscle. All I could do was just lay in the bed, unmoving in the dark. After a while, panic started to surge through me as I realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis. This is something I suffered with earlier in my childhood, but hadn't experienced in a long time. My eyes were open, and they were the only things I was able to move. I moved my vision around the room, desperately trying to make sense of my surroundings, when from the shadows came that horrifying noise, the same sound that came from the bush earlier. My heart was pounding in my chest as I locked eyes with an indescribable, grotesque figure. It wasn't floating as I had initially thought. There was a body that blended seamlessly with the darkness. The creature's mouth hung open as it inched toward me. I still couldn't move. I couldn't even open my mouth to scream. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the creature vanished into thin air. A rush of relief washed over me, and I slowly regained control of my body and finally let out a scream. Trembling and disoriented, I hastily switched on my bedside lamp, lighting up the room. I scanned every corner, confirming that it was safe. What I had experienced felt so real. It was so far beyond the realm of a mere dream. I had had hallucinations and sleep paralysis before, but they always felt like make-believe. Not like this. This felt real. The following day, I told my parents what happened. They told me that it was likely my sleep paralysis, although they were puzzled by the nature of my hallucination. That night still haunts me to this day.